Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Locals Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and it is time for the next installment of the Gaggle Film Club, which serves as an introduction to the Monday night film screening. And this week's selection is Orson Welles' film adaptation of Franz Kafka's famous novel, The Trial. The film was made in 1962 at a time when Orson Welles' filmmaking career was in the doldrums. He had left Hollywood, having quarreled with all the studio heads, and he was making his way in Europe, earning money by essentially making cameo appearances in other people's films, always entertaining, but they were still other people's films. And he was also working on a number of projects. He, however, had a problem, which was that he was had difficulties raising money, and he had difficulties making films that made money. So he was all the time looking for some ways to make some money. He, of course, did a variety of advertisements, became famous as with his sherry ads and ads for wine and so on. However, the trial was one of his projects that actually was completed. He was working on many projects that were never completed, but the trial was something that he did indeed complete. And cinematically, it's without question a masterpiece. I mean, visually, it's quite stunning. The sets, the photography. Welles was always fascinated by German expressionism. I mean, he was you saw it in Citizen Kane and Magnificent Ambersons, and you see it in abundance in the trial. He has all the strange camera angles, the deep focus photography. All you see there, and it's quite fascinating to watch. Where there are real questions that arise with the film is that how faithful it is to the original. Franz Kafka is regarded as one of the masters of 20th century literature, even though very little of his work was published in his lifetime. And even what was published after his death was incomplete. Famously, he had instructed his literary executor, Max Brod, to burn all of his work. Brod, however, reasonably interpreted that request as not really serious because, of course, if Kafka really wanted to burn his works, he could have done so. He didn't need Brod to do it for him. So Brod ignored the instruction and published his works. However, since they were not complete, he really didn't know what chapters were missing, or indeed what order the chapters were supposed to be. The two works for which Kafka, I think, is most famous is The Trial and The Castle. And they both seem to address a similar issue. However, they're also open to many interpretations, which makes, of course, filming them particularly challenging. The Trial was written in 1914. Kafka was living in Prague. He was a German Jewish writer. He wrote in German, and he worked in an insurance firm, working through people's insurance applications. He obviously had great worries about his literary talents. He had opportunities to live in Berlin, but he wasn't sure that he could make it as a writer. It also explains why he was reluctant to publish much of his output. The works that he did publish did arouse a lot of attention. I mean, the most famous of which was, of course, Metamorphosis, which was, opened with that stunning sentence, Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from a night of troubled sleep to find that he had been transformed into a giant insect. I mean, it's quite a opening sentence. But that did arouse quite a lot of attention because it was obviously a stunning short story, and it lent itself to all sorts of interpretations. The story of the trial is quite simple. A man who just reached his 30th birthday, as was Kafka. His name is Joseph K. So one tends to think that he's somehow the K is based on him. Is arrested, but he's not really told what he's charged with, and he is told that he can go about his daily life in a normal fashion, but that he's going to have to address the authorities at some point. And the novel really follows his attempts, first of all, to find out what exactly he has been charged with, who is really responsible with charging him with this unspecified crime, and above all, how he can get himself out of this situation. What do these authorities want from him so that these charges can go away? And as the novel progresses, it becomes clear to him that there is no way that he can free himself of these charges. The novel gets darker and darker. His situation becomes ever more hopeless, and the kind of grim ending is really foretold, from fairly on in the novel. Obviously, there are many different interpretations that were possible. There's the path that Wells chose. It's understandable, was a kind of personal psychological aspect. Wells took Kafka as the person on whom Joseph K. is based, a troubled young man, was a difficult relationship with his father, difficult relationships with women. He has all kinds of hang-ups, suffers from all sorts of feelings of guilt, feelings of inadequacy. And that is overlaid with the plight of man in a soulless world. We're all kind of lonely, and to put it grandly, a world from which God has disappeared, and it can be expressed in the world of the office worker, who was basically, is doing tedious work, friendless. The colleagues are always spying on one another. Everyone is terrified of getting fired. And then after the tedious drudge of a workday, the office worker goes home to a cold, lonely apartment. So that's the path that Wells took, is his interpretation of Kafka, and it's understandable. However, there are problems related to that, which is that Kafka himself wasn't really particularly neurotic. His friends, and he had many friends, found him to be a very charming, gregarious, likable person. He read parts of the trial to his group of friends, which included Max Brod. They found it absolutely uproariously funny, and it is indeed funny. And that's something which is very important to appreciate about Kafka's writing, and particularly in the trial, which is all of it is like a nightmare. The scenes that he describes are very grim, very troubling. And yet Kafka writes in this very humorous style. He has the style of the ironic narrator who applies common sense and tries to make sense of what's going on around him. So it's a fantastical world, and yet Kafka as a writer writes in a very much the realist style of the 19th century, whose writers he enormously admires, like Dickens and Dostoevsky, Balzac. He writes in that style, so he's a realist. He's not writing in any phantasmagorical style. It's very plain and matter of fact, and that's what was important to appreciate about it, is that it is, all of it is done in this very realist way, which of course makes the nightmare quality of the world that he describes all the more troubling and menacing and poignant. So the kind of the guilt aspect of it is kind of reading back from Kafka's own life. And it is true that he had a difficult relationship with his father, though we don't really know to what extent Kafka himself had embellished for the sake of literature his difficult relationship. He, of course, famously wrote a very lengthy letter to his father in which he itemized his various complaints about the way he was brought up. However, it must be remembered that he never actually sent this letter to his father. And the letter itself, turns around and presents a kind of the other side of the case. It was a remarkable tour de force by Kafka that he says towards the end of the letter, all right, well, now that I've brought these charges against you, how would you respond to these charges? And then, of course, he then adopts the persona of his father and how his father would respond to these charges. And of course, he becomes a very powerful and convincing refutation of everything that Kafka had said. And so you get a sense as when he wrote this letter that itself is a work of literature. I mean, he did it really. Maybe he intended to use this at some point for a novel. So it's not immediately clear from this that he was terrified, intimidated by his father, and I was really very troubled in his relationship with his father. Obviously played a role, but he was able to distance himself from that and turn this into kind of remarkable literature. So the literary psychological aspect of it that Wells adopts in the film, is okay, is a partial explanation, but still doesn't really get to, well, what is the trial about? I mean, as I said, it was written in 1914, so it's more than 100 years ago. And people still read it, and people still are trying to figure out what is Kafka really saying here. There was, of course, the political aspect to it, which gained great currency in the 20th century because, hey, people getting arrested for no reason, and then they're destroyed by the authorities. That kind of reminds us of the world of Hitler and Stalin, where people getting arrested en masse, thrown into prison camps, concentration camps, gulags, and some survived, many didn't, and that's it. And so you could say, oh, well, Kafka's describing that world. But that again is a kind of a problem because, of course, he wrote this book in 1914. Kafka was living in Prague, which of course was a part of Austria-Hungary, and while wasn't exactly a wonderful place, certainly wasn't a democracy, it wasn't really that oppressive. It certainly wasn't on a par with the world of Hitler and Stalin. Having said that, however, we can indeed recognize aspects of that world in the world of today, for example, just as people found, aspects of it that they recognized in Hitler and Stalin, even though that all happened many years after Kafka was already dead. So one thing that we can recognize is that these judges, the authorities in the trial, are scoundrels. They are terrible people. They're gangsters. They are horrible, malevolent, evil, and rather stupid people. But however, they have power. And however much a victim such as Joseph K. may feel superior to the authorities, they ultimately wield power over him. And there you can see all of the abuses of the legal systems that we've now become familiar over the years. Again, scoundrels, absolute scoundrels, who, however, exercise power over their hapless victims. We can look at somebody like Judge Arthur Engeron, who presided over the recent civil fraud case against Trump. I'm kind of reminded that in one of the scenes in the trial where Kafka accuses the judges who are sitting in judgment on him, he rushes up to their the desk at which they're sitting, and then he picks up a pile of books, thinking, well, these are legal books, and they turn out to be pornographic books. And Arthur Engeron, when you look at him, this is somebody who posted bare-chested photographs of himself. And when you look at him, you say, he almost certainly sits there reading pornographic books. I mean, that's what you do. You just look at his face. I mean, there's no mystery there. That's who he is. Somebody who posts, I don't know how old he is, but it's late 70s, posts photographs of himself bare-chested on his Facebook page. That's a kind of a scoundrel there, and it's of a piece with his ridiculous judgments. And again, it has that the Kafkaesque quality. We acquired this term Kafkaesque, that you get a judgment issued before anyone has even presented a case. He doesn't, he doesn't even wait for a defense. Already he's issued a judgment declaring that Trump had committed fraud. We saw this in the case of Julian Assange. And no matter how many ways in which we find that Julian Assange should be released, all the different ways, such as we find out that the Swedish case was a fraud, that the women had not accused Assange of rape or sexual assault. We find out that arrest warrant, that European arrest warrant, was entirely bogus. It's a concept that the British government no longer even accepts. These European arrest warrants on which he had been arrested, none of that mattered. He's been in prison for now 5 years, maximum prison, maximum security prison, even though he has not really been charged with anything. The bail jumping, this horrific bail jumping charge, he had already discharged a long time ago, shouldn't even have been brought against him. There were reasonable grounds for his seeking asylum. But there it is. He's sitting in prison without having been convicted of anything. We go back to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, where it is obvious from the demeanor of the judges that already they have decided on the guilt of the accused. So, you see it very much in the case of Slobodan Milosevic. I mean, there's no question. Everyone knows that already the judgment has been written, but nonetheless, the clownish judges go through the motions. And these are scoundrels. They are mediocre legal minds but they are rewarded handsomely by political authorities to do what they need to do, which is to use the law to destroy the lives of individuals whom the authorities detest. So that we can definitely see very much aspects of Kafka's world in our world, more than 100 years later. So I think, and that's one of the reasons I think why people continue to read him and be fascinated by him. There's, of course, the other interpretation, which is that in some ways this is about man's search for meaning. That man is burdened by the feelings of guilt, and guilt over everything, guilt over attitudes towards parents, attitudes towards friends, attitudes towards partners, whatever it is. Man is burdened by guilt, and he's seeking some kind of salvation, but it's never there. Remember, the category of guilt as being this existential matter. It's something that's irrevocable. It cannot be removed. I mean, it was certainly played a role in the writings of Kierkegaard. Kafka was a little bit familiar with. It played an important role in the work of Heidegger, particularly in his classic Being and Time, which was, of course, written after already Kafka was dead. But nonetheless, it is part of a kind of European thought of that era, that guilt is a fundamental human condition. It's something one can't escape. And so that could certainly have played a role in Kafka's thinking. However, you're still left with the very darkness of this story that ends so terribly for Joseph K. And there you have to think that, well, the political aspect of it is the most salient, because that's what we see. We see, that the oppressive authorities do indeed destroy the lives of their targets. We saw how they destroyed the life of Milosevic, and we're now seeing how they're destroying the life of Julian Assange. I mean, he's now a shadow of the man he once was. He's too ill even to attend court hearings, and the judges are perfectly happy with it. And that's exactly how you would find in a trial. You tell them, well, he's actually too ill. After you've now kept him in prison for all these years, his health is now completely shot. Okay, fine. Doesn't matter. That's exactly how you would expect the judges in the trial to think. So then it's, as I say, the trial is open to many interpretations, and I'm certainly looking forward to hearing what gagglers think is the right way to think of the trial. The film is certainly fascinating. As I say, Wells changed aspects of it. He turned this into a film rather than just simply a faithful adaptation of a novel, going scene by scene from the novel. He created his own work of art, and we can then argue about whether he's misinterpreted or miscued. However, what one can't argue about that he did make a remarkable film, and I think it's well worth watching. I hope you will join us. So Monday night at the movies, Orson Welles's The Trial. Thank you. See you at the movies. Bye.